Hey friends, Rick from BCW Supplies inviting you to join me as I travel across the United States visiting with local hobby stores and having a conversation with them. From gaming stores to comic shops to sports collectibles and more. We will take a look at the origins up to the present day events of the store, and if we're lucky, maybe a glimpse into the future as BCW shines the spotlight on their store and their stories. So please join me as we hit the road for the BCW Spotlight. Hey friends, Rick from BCW Supplies here with another BCW Spotlight. This time we're in Atlanta, Georgia at Challenges with the owner, Tony. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to have you here. And I'm glad to be on this show.
Awesome, we appreciate it. And I would like to ask real quick, how did you get started in the comic industry?
Well, it goes way back. I actually started in the business back in 1994 when I was young and skinny. I'm, of course, neither one of those things now. But a friend of mine, Timothy Cummings, basically was like, hey, I want to, open up a comic shop.
Okay.
All right. But at the time, he had already sold his comic collection. And so he came to me knowing that I had an extensive collection. And it's like, well, hey, why don't we get together and partner up and start a business? At the time, I was doing wedding photography. And so I was like, okay, comic shop seems pretty cool and stuff. And since I'm doing wedding photography and stuff, that gives me plenty of time and stuff to help out at the store and, still, do my photography. So I was like, hey, let's do it.
Awesome. Now, you started when? Because I love this part. How long have you been into comics?
Oh, me, I've been in the comics and stuff since I was like 8 years old. My dad at the time worked in food services at the Atlanta airport.
Okay.
And so whenever people would bring and leave comics around the airport, he'd collect them up and bring them to me. And so, that's how I got into the love of actually reading comics. And then one day I'm like sitting on the stoop reading a comic book, and this, older kid comes by and he's like, oh, hey, you collect comic books too? I'm a little kid and stuff. I'm like, I got a few comics on the shelf. So I'm like, yeah, I collect comics. And so the guy's like, well, hey, you want to come see my collection? I'm like, sure. And I go over to his place, and all of a sudden I see these long boxes and bagged comics, and I'm sitting there just like, well, this is awesome. And then he shows me, an overstreet price guide. All right. And so I said, can I borrow this? And he's like, yeah. So I run and I show my dad. I'm like, Dad, these comics can be worth money. And my dad was pretty much one of those just like, okay, well, he's already reading, all right, and, he wants to get into this collectible thing, so it's like, I can get behind that.
Right.
And, basically that's how I actually started collecting, and luckily there was like a convention that would come around like every year for my birthday, and my dad would give me like $50 for my birthday, and back then, we're talking like, the 70s, and that's when, you went to the convention, they had quarter boxes. So I'd go with like, $50 and I'd like just rummage through quarter boxes and just slowly like built up, my collection.
That's amazing. And I mean, there are conventions today, but most of the conventions now, yes, you can still find the bargain bins. Normally they'll have like dollar comics, I believe. But it's nothing like the comics that were coming out in the 70s and even into the early 80s, in my opinion. Like there was a lot of good writing, a lot of good artists. And I'm happy to see where comics have come now, but that's just an awesome story. The $50 and 25-cent comics.
I mean, back then and stuff, as a kid and stuff, I'm not sitting there like, grabbing like Miss Marvel #1s for a quarter, Red Sonja #1 for a quarter, issues of Luke Cage Hero for Hire for a quarter. And now you're basically all of those books, you just add zeros to them, and I originally know for a fact I bought them for a quarter,
I mean, I'm hoping that kids today that get into comics will have that type of experience where they go find the dollar comic. One of the quintessential comics in my collection is a New Mutants number 98. I'm a huge Deadpool fan. And it for years was a dollar bin comic. If you found one in like really great condition that was bagged and boarded and like perfect condition, somebody may try to charge you $5 for that comic. First appearance of Domino, first appearance of Deadpool. And now that comic is $1,750, $1,000 because the movie franchise did well. But I'm hoping now with as many comics that are being produced by all different types of publishers that we'll still have that type of experience for this upcoming generation getting into it. And it won't be immediately priced out where certain comics, Heroes, the War of the Realms, had a comic came out with the Atlantis team in it. It was the first appearance of the Puerto Rican comics. And that one immediately was like $20 to $40 for first edition printings. It didn't have that time to really be a quarter comic and then somebody find it, really get passionate about it and grow. So we react a lot quicker, I think, in the market now than back then. But it's amazing. Like first edition, like Red Sonja, first edition, Miss Marvel number ones, and it's just like, oh yeah, we paid a quarter for them.
Yeah, I paid a quarter for them.
And they're pieces of history. So
that's the thing about it stuff too, is like, I got into comics because I actually love reading comics. It's like right now to this day and stuff, like for special occasions, I'll whip out my X-Men or Avenger number ones or my first appearance of the Black Panther and stuff like that. And I let people like take pictures of them and stuff like that, for the whole, the fan service. And I get a lot of people a lot of times that are like, well, why don't you sell, those books? And I'm like, why? It's like, I'm going to sell them and I'll get money for them. And what do I do with money? I pay bills. To me, it's always been one of those things and stuff. It's like, okay, what sounds cooler? I have Avengers number 1 or I pay my mortgage this month. Right. A whole bunch of dudes play their mortgage each month. How many guys can say like, hey, I got X-Men and Avengers number 1s? Not a lot.
No.
So it's like, I'm all into like, the collectability of it. And I have no interest in selling these books. It's like, I have them because I love them. It's like, I had like, the first Luke Cages. I had the first, Black Panthers. I had, the first Falcon stuff. And I had all of this stuff way before the movies.
Right.
Because I enjoy the comics and I wanted to have the first appearances of those characters. Yeah. And to me, that's why you should be in the comics, because you enjoy reading the comics. And then if something winds up being valuable, good to go. Like, I've made a bunch of stupid mistakes when I was a kid, like Hope 181. All right, I could have picked this book up numerous times back in the 80s for like $30, $35. First appearance of Wolverine.
Right.
But I didn't care because I already had John Size X-Men number 1, and I was a Wolverine fan, but I wasn't a huge Wolverine fan.
Right.
So I completely kept passing up on that book that now I could get $3,500 for, if I, decided to get it and just spent $35. But,
right.
I'm in it because I love comics.
Right. And a lot of the first appearances, to be fair, are normally just a splash. Like the character's there, first appearance in costume, first appearance, but the character's not fully developed. It's not the character that you read and love. It's they're in this book.
Well, and you brought up Deadpool. Deadpool, right, when his first appearance and his Deadpool now are completely different characters.
Yeah, 100%. He was a hired mercenary in the first one, and he wasn't quick-witted. He wasn't breaking the fourth wall. Domino was very small role in that comic, and it was really Marvel trying to push the New Mutants at the time, and
the series was going to be canceled.
Right.
These characters made their appearance after it had already been decided that the series was going to be canceled, and they just wound up being, Cable's first appearance was,
right,
in the end of the series, and these wound up being more popular characters than the characters that the whole series was based around.
Right, and probably for good reason, but that's neither here nor there. So you started as a comic collector. You opened up your first business, going into business with a friend who wanted to open up a comic shop, and you were doing wedding photography. And we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit in the timeline here. When does it become what it is today? When does it become challenges where you're doing comics and you're doing board games and miniatures and collectible card games? Walk us through, how did that transition happen, and what brought about those changes, if I may?
All right. Well, basically, what changed a lot of the things and stuff is that at the time we were actually sharing a spot. Basically, we had the comic shop. I opened up a photography studio, and we teamed up with our longtime friend Don Hilsman, who was a professional comic book artist. He worked for Marvel and DC and CrossGen, and he had like a little art studio where he was like teaching other artists.
Oh wow!
All right, and basically what happened is that we wound up having to move from that location because the landlord that we were renting from wasn't paying their bills.
Oh.
So we had to move to a smaller location. We moved to the smaller location. We only had enough room for the comic shop. So we shut down the art studio, we shut down the photography studio, and we just became a comic book shop.
Okay.
And then that's when customers started coming in. It's like, hey, do you guys carry magic? And we're like, no, we don't carry any magic supplies. That's a place over on Memorial Drive, that you can go to, And then they're like, no, the card game magic. It's like, what's this card game magic? And then they were like, let us show you. And and so then they show both Tim and I how to play Magic the Gathering.
Okay.
And they were like, I'm like, this game is awesome. And so I'm hitting up the distributors like, hey, I need to get, some of this Magic the Gathering. We can get you one box, this is like revised and stuff like that. So it's like, the product was like in very limited supply. You sit there and order 100 boxes hoping you got 10, and that's basically how we started off doing the collectible card games, and we started off with Magic.
Okay.
And then the 96 Olympics came here to Atlanta.
Yes.
Okay, and landlords were getting stupid.
Yes.
Okay, they started like, hey, we can rent out these places for outrageous amounts of money, and your lease is up, so either you give us all this money or, you gotta leave. And so we actually wound up closing down the store.
Okay.
We put everything in storage, and basically I waited till like after the Olympics, and then afterwards I turned around and reopened back up the store.
Okay.
And at that point and stuff, we started getting more into games because I was like, well, games are like really cool, and I really enjoy games. I've been playing chess since I was like 9 years old, competing in chess tournaments.
Wow.
So the whole idea of like strategy games and stuff was like just right up my alley. And so that's how we basically, evolved and started carrying, the role-playing games, the miniature card games. We were actually contacted by Wizards of the Coast back in the day at the first stores to be an official Pokemon, store, back when they had the controlling interest, everything pretty much just developed from there. And then over the years, I've just tried to make the store as diverse as possible. They say you should specialize, but, I'm just like, no, I always figured it's like, I can't necessarily be the best at one particular thing, but I can be really good at a lot of things, and that's one of my strengths. So I decided, okay, we're gonna be that pop culture store. We're gonna carry board games, miniature games, comic books. Right here with us being in a mall, I was able to move more apparel. I sold more bras and panties than any other store could probably even think about. Batman sells.
Yeah.
You can put Batman on anything and Batman symbol will sell.
Very true. So you guys are located at a mall. You guys have had some very interesting things happen over the course of your time here. I've heard you and I talked before this. There have been some movies that have been filmed in and around this area, TV shows as well. Do you want to talk about any of the experiences you've had with that, or no?
Well, first of all, for any of you who watch Cobra Kai, season 2, episode 5 of Cobra Kai, the comic book fight scene starts right here in the store and spills out into our mall.
There we go. And that is a huge show. I've watched it. I love that show. It was done.
Oh, it's great. And we actually taught members of the Cats how to play Magic. And they still come here to the store to buy their Magic product.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah, if you actually go to our Facebook site, you can actually see them in the store playing games.
Oh, wow. All right, you heard it here. They're on Facebook. Go check them out. So speaking of Facebook, speaking of present day, I know that, with gaming, obviously we're coming out of the year that shall not be mentioned, and the pandemic, but how do people find out what's going on at Challenges? What is the best way to connect with your community, and how do you communicate with your community?
Well, the two main things, I hear that it's still kind of like, it's old fashioned, but we still are on Facebook. All right. And we basically have a Facebook group for just about everything we do here.
Awesome.
There's one that's got for Dungeons and Dragons or role playing. It's got like over 170 some members. There's one for Magic. There's one for people who get together and do Gundams. There's one for, like I said, basically everything we do here. So we have a Facebook group, and then we actually have a Discord that a lot of people like to communicate over.
Okay.
I'm still kind of iffy on the whole Discord thing. Basically, my experience with Discord is just playing video games with my buddies after hours after we close the store, But, Discord is really good.
Yep.
And of course, anything that we've put on Facebook automatically goes out onto our Instagram.
Awesome.
And I think it's basically like Challenges Games or Challenges Games GA, to find us on Instagram.
Okay.
And then it's just the name of the store, Challenges Games, on Facebook.
And that is, I appreciate that, and I definitely will be checking out more, especially with some of the history that this store has gone through, that you've gone through, and that you've contributed to not only the comic industry, but also the gaming industry and the community. I did want to give you an opportunity.
Well, before the pandemic, we were actually doing a convention here in the mall, which was actually on its 6th year.
What convention was that?
The Atlanta Sci-Fi and Fantasy Expo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like the largest free convention in the Southeast.
Wow.
We have like over 50 vendors and like 60 hours worth of programming.
Wow.
And as soon as things get a little safer, we're definitely gonna crank that back up.
And will people be able to find out about that through Challenges Facebook page?
It'll be on the Challenges Facebook, and it also has its own Facebook. You can just Google it, and it'll pop up, and
awesome.
You can see images of what we do.
That's what I love about this segment, this series that I'm able to do, is I get to travel around and I get to talk to store owners and people that have been in the industry, whether, like I said, 6 months to going back 2 decades, 3 decades in the industry. There's so much history, and there's so many warm stories that remind everybody this is why we have this fandom. Whether it's comics, whether it's role playing, whether it's Magic the Gathering, everybody has that story of how they got started, or what got them into it, or the bad times that got them through, or the good times that it reminds them of. It's not always just a negative. Sometimes it's a positive, like sitting with a younger sibling, reading comics and talking the who would win between this person and this person, and having that argument. We
still have those arguments now in the store. 50-year-old men are having an argument here in the store. So.
Yeah, because they're never solved. They're never solved. All right.
It all depends on the writer.
Yes, 100%. 100%, because my favorite writer is Jeff Lemire. I love Bloodshot. I'm a huge Bloodshot fan, and everything that he wrote for Bloodshot was absolutely amazing. And I think any other future writers for that character really need to kind of embody what Lemire did with that character. It was phenomenal. But I want to ask you a question. I want you to gaze into the future. You have a lot of history in this industry, a lot of knowledge of the past. I kind of want to know, where do you see Challenges, or where do you want to see Challenges 2 to 3 years down the road?
Well, hopefully, like I said, we'll be moving to a larger location. And that's one of the problems and stuff with having such a diverse store, where we carry board games, gonplas, comic books, apparel, all the collectible card games. And we're even on like TCG Player, and we sell stuff like all over the country. Is that we are literally running out of room.
Sure.
So our, next thing and stuff, hopefully, once things stabilize, is trying to figure out, okay, where can we go to still support our community that'll give us enough room to expand a little bit more.
Awesome. And I can't wait to see it, because there's a lot of history in this store. There's a lot of awesome things that are just hidden gems in here as well. So I challenge you guys, if you are down in the Atlanta area, come out to Challenges. Just look around. It's a wonderful store, as you've seen from some of the footage, and have a conversation. Because Tony, I want to thank you seriously for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit and talk with us, especially about Challenges and your experiences. And until next time, remember, This is Rick with BCW Supplies reminding you when it comes to collecting, storing, or displaying your hobbies or collectibles, BCW has you covered.